Everybody who starts a business eventually gets into some kind of legal trouble. And without the advice in this video, it's going to be way more expensive and painful than it needs to be. 10 years ago, as my third startup ramped up, 3 of our staff created a new company behind everyone's backs and started stealing leads from us while still employed by us, basically siphoning our resources to help spin up a competitor. I found out about it when one of the 3 cracked. It was Thursday night and they came to me and revealed everything, with lots of Skype logs and other evidence. I stayed up all night reviewing it all. I could hardly believe it. The main instigator was someone who I thought of as a friend and who I'd basically hired personally into the company. Painful. Ow! So on Friday morning, exhausted, I did the sensible thing anyone would do in this situation. I called our employment lawyer and listened to her and followed her advice. And that was the first mistake. Now, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not qualified to give legal advice. And at this point, anyone sensible will say,
please be sure to consult a real lawyer before taking action.
The problem is that advice is not enough, because our lawyer took us down the wrong direction. And it wasn't even her fault. It was mine. See, you should definitely consult with a lawyer before taking legal action or inaction. But, and this is important, you need to understand how to make use of the legal advice you get. The purpose of a lawyer is to reduce your legal risk. But there are 2 kinds of good lawyers out there. The first kind try to reduce your risk to 0. They're usually cheaper and you're more likely to have this kind early on in your startup career. The second kind sees that there's always risk and reducing risk to 0 is very expensive, and so helps you balance the risk you're willing to take against how much you're willing to spend. I didn't know this, and I had the first kind of good lawyer. And so I listened to her and I did as she advised. We prepared a proper legal process to fire those people, following all the rules that need to be followed in the UK to ensure we weren't then going to be sued for unfair dismissal. We even gave those former employees a chance to defend themselves and so on. And then on Monday, we set the wheels in motion by presenting them with legal termination letters and sending them home after confiscating their laptops. And this was mistake number 2. The thing about lawyers is that they are weapons. Once you bring in a lawyer, the other person also gets a lawyer. And once there are lawyers on both sides, it's impossible to have an honest conversation. Even with people who I really didn't like, an informal conversation might have gone better and maybe led to a better outcome. By springing the legal process on them as a first step, I guaranteed that their next step was just to call their own lawyers and escalate. Which, of course, they did, and dragged the process out for months to try and squeeze a settlement out of us. In a way, I'm proud that I never did give them a single penny. But what I'm less proud of is that the settlement they were asking for was only about 6K, which is a whole lot less than the process ended up costing us in total, and it would have been so much quicker. Instead, we dragged them and ourselves through a mediation process, still following the legal best practices. It cost 5 times as much and took ages. The third mistake was clearly letting my pride take over and not making the pragmatic decision to just give them the smaller sum of money to move on. I just really didn't want them to come away with anything after what they'd done. So it took 3 months for the mediation process to complete. And then we still waited another 3 months before the time window for them to file an actual lawsuit drew to an end. 6 months of uncertainty, distraction, and high cost, all of which could have been avoided with a simple settlement. Not so smart in hindsight. Which brings me to the 4th mistake. All of this happened without them even filing any formal lawsuit or case. The mere threat was enough to cause all this cost and distraction. And that was my fault too. It's ridiculous. I spent countless hours, even on holiday, obsessing about how to defend us from a shadow. Here's a simple principle. Making legal threats is cheap. Carrying out threats, at least in the UK, is another matter. It was cheap for them to keep hassling us, and it was expensive for us to defend ourselves. Bad deal for us. The way I see it now is this. First of all, a legal threat that's not coming from an actual lawyer is not a legal threat. It's just a threat. Ignore it. Credible legal threats come from law firms. Anything less is as unimportant as an angry tweet, no matter how many fancy words they shove in that email. Next, if there is a credible legal threat, get legal advice, and then do whatever you need to make the threat less likely. For example, if threatened about some tweets, just swallow your pride and delete them. Then the best course may well be to ignore the legal threat until it turns into a real case filed with an actual official body. If it does miraculously go that far, then as a first priority, find a way to settle. But whatever you do, don't waste your time handling threats that aren't even real. I did do one thing right in this sorry process. 3 months in, we had finally completed the mediation process and proved we were right. But the 2 former employees were still threatening to sue us anyway.
Oh, come on!
So I lost my patience with the legal advice to just wait. Making threats is cheap. Defending from threats is expensive. We were in a kind of asymmetric warfare situation there, forced to defend ourselves without ever fighting back. Of course, they were going to continue to throw stuff at us. All it cost on their side was an email, while we had to pay lawyers, have meetings, weigh options, and so on. Why shouldn't they continue? It was free, and maybe it would work. So I made it not free. I figured out a couple of things I could do that would be shots across the bows, and made it clear that we could also cause them a lot of hassle and cost if we wanted to. If the process continued, it would start to cost them as well. And you know what? It worked. We never heard from them again. Until the other side is feeling the pain, they won't stop shooting. If your business is successful, then one day one of these kind of situations will develop. And then these lessons will come in handy. How do you get there though? Well, every business starts with an idea, and until I started thinking the right way, I really struggled with coming up with good new business ideas. But then I figured it out, and since then, I've had endless startup ideas. If you're also struggling, here's a 5-minute video about how to knock that problem out and never run out of ideas again. GM, and good luck. Oh shit!